Okay, so we've talked about some of the reasons why things are published and the way that we use them. Now we're going to move on to some things that we need to consider about the sources that we're reading. So the first thing that you need to consider is that what is the author's purpose? We already talked about that in the last video. Is it to entertain you? Is it to inform you? Or is it to persuade you? And the way to do that, to kind of consider that, is to look for certain traits of the article, like bias words or opinion words, versus whether or not we're just listing certain facts. The next thing that you want to consider is the author credibility. Especially with the internet, pretty much anybody can post online these days. So there's a difference between reading a source that's written by somebody who has a college degree, who went specifically to school to study, to be a doctor or a news writer, versus, a teenager who can publish an opinion piece about anything. So it's really important to look for the author credibility, and most websites will usually post that alongside the author's name. The next thing you need to consider is author bias, and this goes back to credibility. If I'm looking for bias, what I'm looking for is whether or not the author has an opinion about what he or she is writing about. So, do I see a positive word or a negative word in conjunction with a fact? I have to look closely for those. And you know what else you need to be really careful of when you read is your personal bias. So you might feel a certain way about a topic, and if the author agrees with you, then you don't necessarily see it as bias. So you need to be very aware of what you think versus what the author thinks. Text organization is really important. We talk about doing a 5-paragraph essay and organizing things so you can get your essays, your writing to flow. Authors who are posting on the web also think of that. So you need to kind of pay attention to how it's organized, and I'm going to give you more details or examples in the next slide. In addition to that, there are text features for informational reading that you don't normally see for fictional reading. And again, I'm going to get more in depth with that, but these are all the things that you need to consider. The first 3 are really, really, really important because it makes you evaluate your source. So let's talk about text organization when we're reading for information. There are 5 different types that we're going to talk about. The first is chronological, and that is when there's a series of events or steps, and it's from beginning to end. So you're going to look for words like first, second, next, now, then. So those are kind of like your signal words to indicate that it's a chronological organization. The next is compare and contrast, which is kind of when you will, like we've all done Venn diagrams. This is when you're kind of putting things side by side because you want to point out similarities and differences. Cause and effect is when somebody kind of says that this is what starts something and then this is what happens. They're making an argument for why something happens. So they'll give you the initial cause and then they'll try to connect the effect back to it. Problem and solution is actually kind of similar to cause and effect, except instead of stopping at effect, they go on to tell you about the solution. So they might talk about a problem and the effect that that problem has, but they're going to make suggestions on what the best solution to it is and how to make that problem go away. And then last, you have the order of importance. Now this can go different ways. Sometimes it starts with the least important and leads to the most important, or sometimes it starts with the most important and leads to the least important. So some of the signal words for this are first of all, major, most, principal, main, secondary. So those are the kind of the words you want to look for if something is created or written in order of importance. Now I also talked about text features and the different types of text features that we see in informational reading. Include maps, graphics, diagrams, a table of contents, or an index. Now, if I'm reading on the web, those table of contents and index will probably be located in a menu somewhere. A glossary that gives definitions of words. There might be a change in font. So if I look at this particular example, that's a map. And in the context of the text, it's probably there to explain something that they're writing about. Also, we have captions and labels. So they'll label what the picture is above it. We have illustrations and pictures. Headings and subheadings, these are usually bolded or a larger font. And these kind of give you a hint as to what that section is going to be about. Bullets and numbered lists. And then, of course, highlighted text. So looking at this specific example, I can see bullets, I can see headings and subheadings, I can also see some keywords that we talked about on the last one. So this can show me, if I look when I'm scanning the page for this, these headings will show me where I can find specific information, and they give me lists of things I need to consider. So that organization, that text feature, is very helpful for me if I'm trying to get to information quickly. So your task for this, you are going to be looking for 3 articles this time. You are going to be focusing on an article that argues whether or not global warming is real. You don't have to agree with the argument, you just have to find an article that will argue one way or the other. The second thing you need to do is find an article that explains what is involved with buying a car. And the third is an article that explains the difference between a vocational technical college and a university. So for each of those 3 different specific articles that you need to find, we want the author's name and the author's credentials. Remember, that's where it lists how the author is considered the best source for this information. Any bias words, we want you to write down those. Identify what organizational strategies and how you know that. So if you think that it is in order of importance, tell us what words led you to believe that. Text features, identify which text features and why you think those text features were there. And then consider all of that information and tell us what the purpose is. Okay, so was it to entertain, was it to inform, or was it to persuade you of something? And then tell us why you think that.